Darren led Barking and Dagenham Council from 2014 to 2024, with the borough becoming a leader in inclusive housing, community wealth building, sustainable planning, and he's now a senior associate for the communications company Kratos. And I think it goes to show that hardly any of you have left, so I can tell that you're all going to be really interested in what Darren has got to say. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I promise you one thing, you will not be late for the 4 o'clock drinks. A number of you have already asked, I've already said that we will be there. So I'm going to say a few words around what I believe we could see from this Labour government. And so I'm going to start now, but there's going to be a question and answer session at the end. And if you can think about anything you wish to ask, if you don't want to wish to ask whilst we're in that public session, you can come and talk to me afterwards. So here we go. My thoughts on the Labour government. Could it be a Labour of love? That was the question I was asked. Yes, I believe it absolutely could. And I want to explain why. Because this Labour government actually has connected with places like mine. They've looked at what local government has done, Labour local government, whilst in opposition. But before I go into that, let me explain to you about Barking and Dagenham. You can tell that I speak estuary, so I hope you can understand me. It's a unique dialect in the east of London into Essex. No Mark 1 Escorts anymore and no white socks, so I apologise for that. But actually, we've seen a very different Barking and Dagenham. Like many industrial towns up and down this great country of ours, it was hit hard with deindustrialisation. The closure of the major Ford factory. Ladies, you should remember why Ford of Dagenham was so important, because it was the ladies there that changed the country when it came to equality and pay. And I'm very proud of that fact. But it did leave us with high poverty, poor health, low educational attainment, and a sense of alienation. A community frustrated to the point where they voted for the BNP, which became the main opposition of the council. And actually, the data tells us that if the BNP had put up 51 elected candidates, 36 of them would have got elected minimum. So it was clear that the place felt forgotten, the people, the purpose, the place. And that's what drew me into politics. I wanted to rebuild, reshape the community's future from the inside out. Working alongside my friends, family, residents, we built a new vision for people and purpose and place. At the time, I called it civic socialism, New East, New Thinking. It was a community approach, having a conversation about the needs, the wants, how we could develop a framework of community. This later developed into the Barking and Dagenham Inclusive Growth Framework, something I now talk about quite regularly in my new sphere. This is not just a place-led initiative. Actually, it starts much earlier. It's a general conversation about people's challenges and aspirations, listening to the wants and desires of that very proud community. By doing that, we have a People in Place initiative, with the community telling us their master vision for their aspiration. I quickly recognised that that was the most important triangle, the power of three. Everyone wanted a home which was warm and safe and truly affordable to them regardless of tenure. They wanted to live amongst a community that respected them and they respected it. But most of all, they wanted to see a future for them, their family, their neighbours, their area. The community's inclusive growth vision meant they wanted to see permanent homes for permanent communities with appropriate services that were meaningful and local. But it was clear to me traditional regeneration wouldn't deliver that. Regeneration as a rule, and I will say in London, I see it all the time, it will talk about property uplift, it will talk about land uplift, but very often to the exclusion of the existing community. So that needed to change. And in Barking and Dagenham, I pioneered a framework which started with the power of three, led by the community, facilitated for by the local authority, and invested in by partners. This was important because the investor must have a return. The developer must make a profit. But most importantly, the community must be empowered. After the power of three, we then come to the 5 steps of change. The cold data, and local authorities have the best data sets in the country. In fact, every local authority in England, I have the ability to get their local data sets and understand the cold data. Because noughts and ones are only noughts and ones. It doesn't tell you the story. That comes from the warmth of the conversation you have with the community. I realised then that my authority, like many around the country, couldn't play the parent any longer. We had to be the facilitation partner. Working alongside the residents who had their vision, their master plan as salts in the community, helping to develop the aspiration of the future. Some people say, did it work? Well, I can tell you over the 10 years, we attracted over £10 billion of investment, not government, international, national. We helped build thousands of homes, thousands. We upskilled residents and we built a social infrastructure that would truly benefit the whole community. By linking housing to job skills, we had a proven development that could raise the quality of life, not just for a few, but for the many. This work inspired me to carry on working within the Local Government Association and also in London councils, because it was important that we carried on building growth in those that have the toughest times. Today, Labour's national housing and community development plans are grounded in the same commitment, I believe, to see that growth in community. I hope they will take the lessons of boroughs like mine, but so many good local authorities up and down the country, regardless of which flag they fly under. I do believe they are fully committed to building communities that are affordable, high quality and sustainable. And it's important that that is conveyed in our communities. So what can we expect from the new government on housing? Labour's approach to housing is rooted in the core belief that housing is a right, not a privilege. This means everyone should have the access to permanent homes, as I said before, that are safe and affordable to them and well connected in community. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has already pledged 1.5 million homes over the next Parliament term, which is ambitious, it's fair to say. But for me, that's a step forward, because before then, we didn't have any target. And that's a travesty for community. So even if we don't make the 1.5 million homes, it's up to all of us to buy into the vision of a national house building programme that will help all communities regardless of status, tenure or location. The Deputy Prime Minister only last weekend announced the Homes Accelerator programme, which is aiming to reduce delays on planning and stalled, put my teeth back in, sites. Let's wait and see how that works, but I am optimistic. This isn't just about building homes quickly. We saw that in the late 60s, early 70s. It's about building quality that will make sustainable communities that are genuinely about partnership with that community, the public-private sector. Over the years, trust has certainly been eroded, and I believe that this approach will once again rebuild trust and confidence in communities, speeding up planning and allowing development to happen. Labour's vision goes beyond putting up buildings. As I said before, I believe it's about creating communities. The new towns will be important. In fact, only last week I wrote about different schemes that already have 10,000 homes ready to go that have had planning permission across this great nation of ours. So let's see them get built. The focus on building homes close to the right amenities, the jobs, the skills, the services, it's nothing new. We've been doing it for generations. So we need to work through how the community can take the lead in developing the master vision they want to see for their people in that place. In the autumn budget, it's fair to say, even though it was tough, there were some nice surprises. It certainly gave us all the ambition of direction by this government. The Affordable Homes Programme, the AHP, there was an additional 500 million, bringing it up to 3.1 billion. But we must do more, because the housing benefit bill today is still around 30 billion, and that's growing. But what it says to me is the government is looking at the right areas to make sure that we have true affordability in our community. Building safety. In my tenure as being housing lead for London and with the LGA, I spent a lot of time in ministerial meetings about Grenfell. It's a travesty that we haven't fixed the very problem that was there 7 years ago. In fact, it was a travesty it happened ever at all. But I am pleased to see the government has now said there's another £1 billion in making buildings safe. And in fact, one of my last duties as a leader of a council was to be with the residents of a private block that was privately built. In fact, it was a conversion from an office building into residential. All of it was leasehold or private in whatever guise, so no connection to the local authority. But the last bank holiday, I spent 8 hours making sure the families in that building which got destroyed were safe, were able to find the right support across medical and local government. And ultimately, I'm pleased to say, we were able to facilitate most of the families in accommodation that they could rent locally as well. I'm also pleased to see that there's the right to buy reform. We can all argue whether it's right, wrong or indifferent, but the truth is it's for local communities to decide. One of my last acts in the Local Government Association as chair of the board that dealt with housing was to get a cross-party support process for the policy that the LGA has today. It should be down to local people to decide what they want locally when it comes to the right to buy. And it's the first time that the LGA, the Local Government Association, actually had a complete idea as one voice as an organisation. Lastly, because I've just been notified that I've done 15 minutes, which seems to have gone awfully quickly, the social rent settlement. In the last 12 years before this government, 6 years, local authorities were capped. That actually meant that the work that all local authorities or RSLs needed to do in the housing of old stock was hindered. I'm pleased to see that there's a 5-year settlement and it's CPI plus 1%. That means we can reinvest in the much needed stock of this country. Because the true growth that you are going to see in this country has to start with the institutions facilitating the infrastructure. The most important infrastructure in this country is somebody's home. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. So, hopefully, you've been working on the old Slido bit for some questions for Darren. And interesting, I mean, one of the things I suppose that in the budget, I almost thought there was a little bit of a less of an emphasis and discussion and commentary about place than perhaps there has been in terms of new initiatives. I don't know whether you picked up the same. I get the bits about the housing bit. I'm talking about, I suppose, more stimulus in terms of economic growth.
Yeah, look, the government has a situation where they've got very limited money and they can either subsidise support in local government having conversations, or they can subsidise the economy in a way that we need it to grow. And they've made a choice, and I think you're right. I think they took the latter. They looked at what they need to do for the private sector to get the jobs moving, because actually, if you listen today, unemployment's just gone up for the first time in a little while. So I don't disagree that you have a point. Where what I would say is, I think it's now for all local authorities, like the one I led, to change its mindset about what it's there to do. And as I said in my speech, is it about being a parent? Is it about running all the services? Or is it now about being a facilitator and overseeing those services that are needed in the community, but most communities are able to be empowered to deliver directly or indirectly? And that's a mind shift for local government to start working on. And this platform, what you're doing today, colleagues here, they've come because they want to listen to that. How can they move from that space? If we are going to wait on government, there will not be the money in this first term to be able to deliver what we would like to see in the community.
I agree. Before we had quite a discussion on you can't rely on government, you need to get some private sector investment. They need to be the conversations. Government should come second,
yes.
But in a lot of places that isn't happening. Now we've got a question here which I'm sure you probably thought would come, and we've already had a lot of commentary on it. Competitive funding pots. Martin was railing against them this morning and sort of saying it was an absolute disgrace. So do you think we'll get rid of them?
So Angela Rayner made it very clear at the Local Government Association conference 2 weeks ago that that is the intention, to get rid of them. And again, I can show you that councils up and down the country, including my own at the time, could show that if you can have consistent public and private investment over political cycles, actually what you can achieve is much more than what is being proposed in the pots in the first place. So I'm pleased to hear that from Angela. I hope that the government is good and true on this. The settlements are more than 1 year. You've got to remember, for the last 4 years, 5 years, local government was running, especially in housing, on 1 year settlements. Yep. So I think the intention is there. It depends whether the economy can support it. But again, I would argue that you shouldn't be relying on government. I was able to prove on building 20% of London's social affordable housing through the private sector, may I add. There was some grant towards the end, but the first scheme we ever did was with a private investor, and it was all sub-market. So you don't need the government. What you need is the conversation to have the mechanics, to be able to deliver the outcomes. Government is just a bonus, and that's the way I would say to people, you need to look at this, certainly this first term, because I think it's going to be very tight for the national government to be able to come in and deliver more funding.
I would agree. An interesting point there. Do you feel that the term affordable housing has been used to mask the need to build true social housing?
Really, really interesting one. I can show you the data is wrong on both. That's a big statement to make, but I can prove it. So Barking and Dagenham ONS, so Office of National Statistics, had under their deprivation, it was the most deprived area in the country, worse than Blackpool. And we took no honour of having that badge. But what was really interesting was when you actually looked at what housing was required, we in this country still run a 20th century housing system. So it's either council housing, market rent, or for sale. Actually, it needs to be more refined. And you need what we call a community rent model, where you have rents based on need and income. Because most people's income and need, if you are in real dire need, you will get what is council state housing, social housing as we call it today. But the truth is your benefits are even higher than what the rent is. So in my borough at that time, it was 17,000 the rent a year. That's the money you'd be on equivalent. But if you got benefits, you'd be on 24,000 capped. So the local authority was already losing, in my case, £500,000 a week in rent to income, because the LHA was different, local housing allowance was different to the rent level. So what we actually need to do is work through what we need to see in each community, because they're different, the data's different, the response needs to be different. But in Barking and Dagenham, and I say under the ONS it was the most deprived area, if you take 15,000 to 20,000, then 20,000, 25,000, so on, up to 60,000, it would go up in increments of 7% in my community. Once you got to 60,000 though, that was the biggest grouping. That was 30% of my community had an income of 60,000 coming into the household. They had no chance of getting any council housing, and nor did any of the others down to the 24,000. Because the 24 or 25,000, that's the benefit. So every other part of that community was being missed. And that's where BTR come in. So as a council, the council now owns the largest BTR build-to-rent company of any local authority. And I set that up purposely for people that needed the homes that we couldn't facilitate in what would be traditional council housing. And actually, the data told me that that was the right thing to do. So this is where I think the government has got it wrong, where they just talk about social housing or council housing over, and then the term affordable, it depends where you live in the country and what your income is, whether it's truly affordable. So I'll give you a different terminology. I will call it infrastructure homes. I would say all what we are building today is the infrastructure this country needs, and what you'd then have is that conversation on that ladder of what number it would be. So infrastructure 1 could be the equivalent of council housing. Infrastructure 12 could be shared ownership or equivalent of some sort of ability to buy into the asset, right? But you could have all those variants in between. So no one knows. You take away the stigma of what people talk about in social housing or affordable, and you start making people feel valued. The other thing I would do there is I would say this property at the market rent is worth X. But because we value you as a society, as a community, we will give it to you for Y, because we understand the situation you're in. That brings a very different mindset now about the housing we are building. We are investing in people rather than it just being seen as it is today as put them into that type of housing. We need to have a very different mindset. And we did this 100 years ago for the Homes for Heroes. Nearly every region of this country has estates that link to the Homes for Heroes. So why are we any different 100 years on? For us, though, it's about growth and infrastructure. So these are infrastructure homes.
That's an interesting thought on that. And on a different tack, culture, creative industries, very important. We're in a squeezed financial situation. What's your view on how government will and won't prioritise that, given that, as the question is saying, important for well-being, important for the local economy?
So every place has culture. Every place has culture. My culture is I eat pie and mash and liquor, I watch West Ham, and I talk estuary. That's my culture. Now, what we need to do is understand what culture actually is. Culture is community. So how do we get people to understand that what they do is already culture? How do we empower people to feel that they have a value in our community? And that can come in very different ways. And I remember having a conversation at the time with a resident who used to take photos for a living. He was a builder. And then he'd done his knee in and he couldn't do building any longer. And I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I like taking photos." So I said, "Well, why don't you set up like Photoshop or something, do something around that?" And he went, "Nah." He said, "It sounds a bit arty." And I said, "But you love taking photos." Well, the guy now runs his own studio. He's mates with David Bailey, if some of you are old enough to remember David Bailey, yeah? And he is really happy. Now, that's culture. It's just there was a block in what he understood it to be. So working class culture like mine is going to be different to a neighbouring culture of whether it's class or region. But we all have our own culture, and it's very important. You must have culture in community.
Okay. Well, if you West Ham must be a pretty tough watch at the moment, then.
Well, we did win the World Cup for the country, so we'll let you off. But no, it is a tough watch. I was there last Saturday. It was a nightmare. But look, I mean, it is really important. Bricks and mortar is just bricks and mortar. Hearts and minds build community. You need the two together.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one here which is important, I guess, for the room, and back to, I suppose, my commentary about budget. Do you think government will prioritise regenerating town centres? And again, I suppose I mean that beyond bricks and mortar.
Yeah. To give credit to the previous government, I think they were already trying, badly, but they were trying. I think this government will continue, but again, if we are waiting for government to find the finances, we're going to be waiting a long time. It's about how you can build those relationships. So first of all, it's got to be, what does the community living in that place want to see? What is their master vision for their aspiration of people in place? Once you've got that, it's then going out to find the right partners that will invest in that vision. And that's the job of a local authority today. as I said, it has to be led by the community, facilitated by the local authority, invested in partners. That's what I was able to do. The largest film studios in 25 years in London, Pinewood of the East, if you like. I call it London's Hollywood. That's now been built. 5 years ago, I was being laughed at by the institutions of film. Today, with the most diverse community, one of the most diverse communities in the country, I've got young people of all ethnic backgrounds getting into film because they were doing TikToks in their bedroom. And that's what you guys need to think about in your places. What makes your place special? What makes that community thrive? How do you then find the partners to invest in what makes that place special?
Yeah. Cool. So, last one, you've talked about the new towns, which have been talked about a lot. And question here, what policies will kind of ensure that these new towns, these 10,000 home places, will properly support communities? Because again, it's back to your bit about you can build stuff, but that's not a community, is it?
No. Okay, so it's quite interesting because everyone keeps thinking about leafy towns, in leafy areas. Well, on the edge of East London, which has some of the highest deprivation, as I say, my borough is still classed under EONS. But if you take the estuary, which actually there's some very rich people, but there's some exceedingly poor people. There's 3 locations that have planning permission already with the infrastructure included. And that's because those conversations have been had. That would build, just those 3 locations would give us 75,000 homes. I know, because I wrote a piece on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, where across all different regions of this country, there is already planning permissions that have been sought for 10,000 homes plus. What we need to do is make sure that all that social infrastructure, the stuff that makes community. So all of us have school buildings, but for 12 weeks of the year, the school building is empty. After 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the school building is empty. Every weekend, by and large, the school building is normally empty. My question would be is why? Because that building is owned by all of us. No matter what status it has, it still technically connects to us as a community. So what we need to start saying is, what could that building become? And again, when I was doing this in Barking and Dagenham, we have schools that are faith facilities for different faiths on different days at different times. They had community spaces, they had cafeterias, the sports facilities. Why are we building more and different sports facilities when we've got sports facilities sitting there empty most weekends and most evenings? It's about thinking differently about people in place and utilising all the infrastructure that we are able to facilitate as local authorities when I was in that space, or certainly what we should be facilitating, even if it's built by private money, there should be that social infrastructure to make sure that communities can be empowered.
Right. Darren, it's flown by, I knew it would. What a fascinating insight and some very, very different views on place, and particularly housing and some of the priorities that obviously Darren has delivered on previously. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Okie coke. So we've reached the end, guys. You're sad, aren't you? What an amazing day, and well done, as I say, for moving around the building, and well done for keeping so many of you here right till the end. I think there's been such a lot of content, of insight, of ideas that I've taken away, and I hope you have too. I hope there's been lots of scribbling in your back of your place booklets, and that they are special to you. We were going to do a final poll. We're going to do a final poll now at this point. So This is a really dangerous one to ask this. How have you found the conference today? Now, can I link this with the fact that there will be a free bar? Right? No. Anyway, so please, let us know, because it's very, very important what you think. Because if we're not putting on the right thing, if we're not doing it in the right way, in the right place, then that's disappointing. So there we go. What have we got? We've got all sorts of things. Insightful, inspiring, that's good. A lot of I words, we like them. It's been pizzazz, yeah, you just got to keep, you're pizzazzed. I mean, you've got to keep using that word, I tell you, it's really, really important. Hopeful, well, that's good. Reassuring, so I think, they're really, really important words. Fascinating, enlightening. Okay, brilliant. Well, I'm pleased. I'm sure because it's on Slido, you've been honest with that as well, which is great. So I want to thank you for so much for being here and enthusiastically throwing yourself into the day. And as I say, I've heard lots of interaction, lots of laughter in the breakout sessions. A super massive thank you to the speakers on your behalf, who've given really generously of their time, their knowledge, experience, and inspiration. And you've used that word, and I'm taking it that they have inspired you. Yet again, a big shout out to our partner sponsors, our young photographers from Chesterfield College, who've been absolutely amazing today, the AV team, the tremendous hotel staff, and a big shout out from me to the Thinking Place team. We are actually very little, and a huge amount of work has gone into making this what you have described there. Particularly to Sarah, to Nick, who've worked hours to make this happen, and the other members of the team today. Unbelievable hard work, their attention to detail, their care to get everything right is amazing and a privilege for me to be part of. So we're even being tech-led to get your feedback. So on the back of your booklet, there's a different QR code. So the feedback bit, you don't need to do it immediately. It's only really, really short, right? So if you can do that before you leave, that will be fantabadosi. We would love you, it wasn't a lie, we would love you to join us for a drink, right? Which is through the doors and in the grazing station there on your left. That way, we get to chat with you, you get to carry on networking, and as I say, just finally from me, what a fabulous day it's been. I hope it certainly has been for us. I hope it has been for you. Have a safe journey home.